In the summer of 1970, something appeared at Watkins Glen that shouldn't have existed. A white race car with two massive fans protruding from its rear, its boxy, angular body sealed to the ground with articulated skirts of transparent Lexan plastic, pulling downforce from a vacuum instead of pushing it through air. It looked like a spacecraft that had crash-landed in the racing paddock. The engineers looked at it with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The drivers looked at it with fear. Because this machine, the Chaparral 2J, had arrived to do something that no race car had ever done before. It would prove that aerodynamic grip was not a function of speed, but rather a function of engineering. And in doing so, it would change racing forever. Jim Hall was born into Texas oil wealth, but he never cared much about drilling wells. What obsessed him was the mechanics of speed. At Caltech, where his family expected him to study geology, Hall switched his major to mechanical engineering, a decision that would have seemed unremarkable if not for the airplane crash that killed his parents and sister during his freshman year. Overnight, he inherited a fortune. He switched schools, deepened his engineering studies, and emerged with a degree in mechanical engineering and something far more valuable: freedom. The freedom to experiment. By the late 1950s, Hall had purchased land outside Midland, Texas, and built a private racetrack he called Rattlesnake Raceway. It was not a place to race, it was a place to think, to test, to fail in private before risking anything public. In 1961, working with Hap Sharp, another wealthy Texan who shared his obsession with mechanical innovation, Hall created the first Chaparral. It was a modest thing by today's standards, front-engined, tube-framed, with an aluminum body and a Chevrolet 318 engine. But it was the beginning of something revolutionary. The early Chaparrals were like nothing else on the track because Hall believed that racing success wasn't about copying what everyone else was doing. It was about asking a fundamental question that everyone else had stopped asking. What if we approached this differently? What if we used engineering to solve problems that other teams thought were unsolvable? In 1965, Hall did something that shocked the sports car world. He brought a Chaparral 2 to the 12 Hours of Sebring in pouring rain and won. But that was just a prelude. A year later, at Bridgehampton, Hall debuted the Chaparral 2E. This machine had something that had never been successfully integrated into a racing car before. A massive, adjustable aerodynamic wing mounted high on spindly struts, flanked by an innovative nose intake that fed air down a venturi tunnel to generate additional downforce. The wing could be adjusted by the driver using a third pedal on the cockpit floor, flattening out on the straights to reduce drag and increasing its angle in the corners to generate maximum grip. For the first time in racing history, a car could generate downforce independent of its speed. The 2E dominated Can-Am until 1967 when the FIA banned adjustable wings, classifying them as movable aerodynamic devices. Hall's innovation had been too far ahead of its time. Rather than accept defeat, he retreated to Midland and began asking a new question. If external wings are banned, what if we generated downforce by removing air instead of pushing it? Throughout the late 1960s, Hall and his engineers studied ground effect, aerodynamic theory, pressure differentials, and vacuum principles. They ran wind tunnel tests. They studied the concept of hovercraft, machines that could levitate on a cushion of negative pressure. And then came the moment that would define everything that followed. A young fan sent Hall a letter containing a simple pencil drawing, a car shaped like a beanie cap, with a propeller on top designed to create downforce through suction rather than pushing air. Hall looked at that crude sketch and saw the future. He showed it to his engineers and asked one question: wouldn't this be a good way to do it? What Hall was proposing would require solving interconnected engineering problems that had never been solved in racing before. If you could seal a car to the ground using articulated skirts, you could use powerful fans to extract air from beneath the car, creating a partial vacuum. That vacuum would generate downforce independent of the car's forward motion. It would work at any speed, even from a standstill. But finding the fans was only the beginning. Hall needed fans powerful enough to generate the required suction, And he found them in an unlikely place: military hardware. The fans he selected were 17-inch axial flow units lifted from an M109 howitzer, capable of pushing out 9,650 cubic feet of air per minute at 6,000 RPM. But powering those fans would drain the main engine, so Hall's engineers added a second power plant, a 45-horsepower Rockwell JLO engine, the kind normally found in snowmobiles. This two-stroke would run independently, its only job to drive the fans and maintain the crucial vacuum seal. When this engine ran at full power, it produced an ear-splitting, high-pitched drone that was so distinctive and disturbing that drivers following the 2J couldn't see through the dust being blown into their faces. The most ingenious component was the skirt system. Hall needed something that could seal against the ground while constantly moving up and down with the car's suspension. He approached General Electric and discovered their revolutionary new material: Lexan polycarbonate plastic, light and flexible yet virtually unbreakable. The skirts would be machined from sheets of this material and connected to the suspension through a complex system of cables, pulleys, and machined arms that would keep them perfectly aligned with the road surface at all times. The primary engine was a Chevrolet ZL1, a massive 427 cubic inch aluminum big block generating 650 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, paired to a unique clutchless semi-automatic 3-speed transaxle. With a fiberglass resin body and aluminum components, the entire car weighed barely over 1,800 pounds. But the real magic was in how the two systems worked together. When the Chevrolet fired up, you heard a deep, muscular growl. Then, as the JLO snowmobile engine came to life, a completely different sound penetrated the air, a high-pitched whining drone from the depths of hell itself. As the fans spun up to full speed, the car would visibly hunker down, lowering by 2 inches as the suction took hold and the Lexan skirts sealed against the track surface. The downforce figures were astonishing. The 2J could theoretically generate up to 2,200 pounds of downforce. When fully fueled and loaded, the car could pull between 1.25 and 1.5 G in the corners, a level of lateral acceleration that was completely unprecedented for a sports car at the time. This meant the 2J could take corners at speeds that would cause other cars to spin out and crash. It could brake deeper than any other car on the grid, and most importantly, it could do all of this without wheel spin, without uncontrollable oversteer, without the delicate balance and compromise that every other racing team was forced to make. By the time the 1970 Can-Am season was set to begin, Hall knew he had something special. But he needed the right driver, someone with the skill and courage to extract the maximum from this alien machine. He reached out to Jackie Stewart, the reigning Formula One world champion, who had won the 1969 F1 championship in a dominant season. Stewart agreed to a one-race deal at Watkins Glen for what would be only his third Can-Am start. When he first drove the 2J at Rattlesnake Raceway in Midland, his reaction was immediate and profound. The grip, the acceleration, the braking power, all of it exceeded anything he had experienced in a Formula One car. In his autobiography, Stewart would later write, "The car's traction, its ability to brake and go deeply into the corners, is something I've never experienced before. Its adhesion is such that it seems to be able to take unorthodox lines through turns, and this, of course, is intriguing." But Stewart also recognized the challenges: the complexity of the car, the number of systems that needed to work in perfect harmony, the vulnerability of the auxiliary engine to mechanical failure. All of these things presented risks. The 2J was an engineering marvel, but it was also a prototype, untested in real racing conditions, unproven in the crucible of competition where failures could happen at high speeds with catastrophic consequences. On July 12, 1970, a white Chevrolet pickup truck towing a trailer pulled into the paddock at Watkins Glen International Raceway in upstate New York. A crowd gathered as the team began to unload. The sight was unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Here was this white race car, brutally simple, boxy, almost architectural in its geometry. No flowing curves like the McLarens, No dramatic aerodynamic shapes like the Porsches. Just flat panels and right angles and two massive fans protruding from the rear like something from a science fiction movie. Jackie Stewart qualified the Chaparral 2J third behind the two-factory McLaren M8Ds. Given that the 2J was completely new to racing, a third-place qualifying position was impressive. It revealed the car's raw potential. This machine was already running at the front of the grid, despite its developmental status. But the race itself would prove to be a masterclass in the dangers of innovation. On just the second lap, Stewart found himself in third place, hunting down the leading McLarens. But then, approaching backmarker traffic, the JLO engine began to suffer from vapor lock, fuel boiling in the fuel lines due to the intense heat generated by the fan system and engine. Stewart was forced to pit for a long stop to allow the cooling system to recover. When he rejoined the race, he was now trailing the field. Stewart drove brilliantly, using the 2J's superior grip and braking power to carve his way back through the field. He was running lap times that were competitive with the leading McLarens. But the mechanical gremlins were only just beginning. Track debris had become partially lodged in the cooling system. The brakes were acting strange, and then, on lap 32, disaster struck. The JLO engine vapor-locked again, and when Stewart tried to downshift with the unique automatic transmission, something went catastrophically wrong. He missed a shift, and the gearbox's internal components scrambled. The transmission was finished. Stewart guided the crippled 2J back to the pits, but the damage was done. The car was retired from the race. After a 2-month hiatus to address the mechanical issues, the Chaparral team emerged at Road Atlanta on September 13, 1970. The JLO engine had been converted to fuel injection to combat the vapor lock problem. The drive belts to the fans had been moved outside the car's interior and enclosed in what the team called a Martian bra, an external shroud designed to protect the belt system and improve aerodynamic flow. At the controls was Vic Elford, a mercurial and brilliant racing driver known for his smooth style and mechanical sympathy. In early practice at the hilly Georgia circuit, something almost miraculous happened. The 2J was 3 seconds per lap faster than the all-conquering McLaren M8DS, the same cars that had been dominating the Can-Am series for years. 3 seconds per lap in professional racing is a chasm. The McLaren drivers looked at each other in disbelief. Elford's qualifying performance was dominant. Despite having never driven the Road Atlanta circuit before, he posted a time that put the 2J on pole position by 1.2 seconds, a massive margin. The McLarens were suddenly the underdogs, relegated to second place, and facing the possibility of irrelevance. But racing can be cruel. On the opening lap of the race, a fatigued ignition wire caused the JLO engine to begin misfiring. The loss of suction meant the 2J lost its supernatural grip and began to behave like a normal race car. Elford was forced to pit for an extended stop to replace the problematic wire. By the time he rejoined the race, he had fallen back to 6th position, 6 laps down from the leaders. Still, the fact that the 2J finished a race, any race, was progress. The Chaparral team had proven that their complex machine could survive the rigors of Can-Am competition. The team focused their efforts on the penultimate Can-Am round at Laguna Seca near Monterey, California. This was a compact, winding circuit that demanded precision and tremendous grip, exactly the kind of track where the 2J should absolutely dominate. What happened at Laguna Seca was almost too good to be true. In qualifying, Vic Elford recorded a time so fast it seemed unreal. He broke the 1-minute barrier, running times deep into the 59-second range. The leading McLarens were more than a second and a half slower. Elford had only ever driven Laguna Seca a handful of times, yet he was setting a pace that completely obliterated the previous track records. All the pieces seemed to be falling into place. The team had solved the vapor lock problem. The fuel injection system was working beautifully. Mechanical reliability seemed to be improving. Elford had proved that he understood the car's unique handling characteristics. All signals pointed toward a dominant victory, perhaps the car's first win, a validation of all the engineering work, all the innovation, all the risks Hall had taken. Then came race morning warm-up, and the cruelest blow of all. As Elford was running preliminary laps to prepare for the race, the main Chevrolet engine suffered a catastrophic failure. A connecting rod punched through the engine block, causing immediate and irreparable damage. The team stared in shock. They had only one spare Chevrolet engine, and they didn't have time to remove the damaged one, install the fresh one, and verify all the systems before the race started. In a moment of pragmatism mixed with desperation, Hall made the difficult decision. They would not start the race. The 2J would be officially listed as a did not start. Another race lost, another opportunity for victory squandered by mechanical failure. One final race remained on the 1970 Can-Am calendar, the season finale at Riverside near Los Angeles on November 1st. The Chaparral team regrouped once more, installed the fresh Chevrolet engine, and prepared for what might be their last chance to prove the 2J's worth before the inevitable ban that was already being discussed behind closed doors. Vic Elford strapped back into the 2J, and once again he demonstrated why the car was so special. In qualifying, he set a time that was 2.2 seconds faster than the nearest McLaren, the largest qualifying margin of the entire season. 2 full seconds. At a high-speed circuit like Riverside, that was an absolutely devastating advantage, a statement that said this car is operating on a different level than everything else here. The race began with every expectation that this would finally be the Chaparral's moment of triumph. Elford had pole position. He had superior grip. The mechanical issues seemed to be resolving themselves. Victory appeared to be inevitable, destiny almost certain. But then, just 2 laps into the race, the JLO engine broke its crankshaft. The sound of precision machinery failing at high speed is unmistakable. The secondary power plant that had caused so many headaches all season finally gave up the ghost. Without the JLO engine driving the fans, the suction system was useless. Without suction, the 2J was just another heavy race car, slower than its lighter, more aerodynamically refined competitors. Elford managed to nurse the car around for 5 more laps, but it was hopeless. The car was retired from the race, and the 1970 Can-Am season was over. The 2J's racing career was effectively finished. As the season came to a close, the politics of motor racing were about to catch up with the physics of engineering. The other teams, particularly McLaren, had watched the 2J's performances with a mixture of awe and alarm. Here was a car that was 2 to 3 seconds faster than anything else on the grid. Here was a car that was using technology that nobody else possessed, a technology that was generating downforce through a mechanism that fell outside the traditional understanding of what was legal in racing. Bruce McLaren, despite being a friend of Jim Hall, led the charge to have the 2J banned. Even though Bruce had been killed in a testing accident in April 1970, his team continued the campaign. McLaren's position was straightforward. The 2J's fans and skirts constituted movable aerodynamic devices that violated existing regulations. The suction system should be illegal, they argued, because it represented an unfair advantage that could not be quickly replicated by other teams. The SCCA, the Sports Car Club of America, which sanctioned the Can-Am series, originally approved the 2J for racing. Hall and his team had invited the SCCA to Texas to inspect the car before they brought it to the races, and they received explicit permission to compete. But as the season progressed and McLaren's protests became more insistent, as other teams added their voices to the outcry, as the political pressure mounted, the SCCA's position began to shift. For Hall, it was a bitter repeat of what had happened in 1967, when his innovative adjustable wings had been banned. Innovation in racing, he was learning, had a short half-life. Once your advantage was visible, once competitors understood what you were doing, the urge to legislate against it became irresistible. By the end of the 1970 season, the SCCA ruled that the skirts and fan system constituted movable aerodynamic devices and therefore violated existing regulations. The Chaparral 2J was banned. It would never race again. Hall was devastated, but not surprised. He had expected it. What was difficult to accept was the unrealized potential. The 2J had only competed in a partial season, had been hampered by mechanical unreliability, had never actually won a race. Had it been allowed to continue, had the secondary engine been made more reliable, had the team had time to refine and develop the package further, Hall was convinced the 2J would have been utterly, completely dominant. The only time it really ran well around a racetrack, we were more than a second faster than the competition, and sometimes two, Hall reflected. That's a lot. We could have improved the performance further by being more accurate with the skirts, by putting a little more power into the vacuum system. We could have gotten weight out of it. I think it would have been spectacular. But if the 2J's racing career was cut short, its historical impact was just beginning. 8 years after the 2J was banned, the technology of ground effect, the fundamental principle behind the fan car, resurfaced in Formula One. In 1978, Colin Chapman's legendary Lotus 79 debuted with a sophisticated ground effect system that used carefully shaped tunnels under the car to create suction and downforce without external fans. The system used sliding Lexan skirts, the exact same material and concept that Hall had pioneered with the 2J, to seal the low-pressure area beneath the car. Chapman's Lotus 79 dominated the 1978 Formula One season, winning 12 races and both driver and constructor championships. The ground effect revolution had begun. But Hall's influence didn't end there. In 1978, when ground effect was demonstrating its power in Formula One, another team had a similar idea. Brabham, led by designer Gordon Murray, created the BT46B fan car. It used a large fan positioned at the rear of the car, supposedly for cooling the engine. In reality, it was performing the exact same function as Hall's 2J, extracting air from beneath the car to create downforce through suction. Niki Lauda won the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix in the BT46B, but then it too was quickly banned after a single race when the other teams protested. The 2J had been the first. Hall had proven the concept. And now, 18 years after the 2J's brief moment in the sun, Formula One was rediscovering technology that Hall had already perfected decades earlier. The influence of ground effect has only grown with time. In 2022, after a hiatus of 4 decades, ground effect aerodynamics returned to Formula One as the primary method of generating downforce. The new regulations specifically emphasized shaped underfloor tunnels to generate efficient downforce through ground effect. Teams wound back through the clock and studied old videos and photographs and technical papers from the 1970s, looking for clues about how to properly implement this technology. Jim Hall and the Chaparral 2J had shown the way. The world just needed time to catch up. When Jim Hall stepped back from the sport in the early 1970s, devastated by the 2J's banning and tired of fighting bureaucratic opposition to innovation, he did not immediately recognize that his greatest contribution to racing was still ahead of him. Not through the 2J directly, but through the decades-long influence that the car would have on racing technology. In the years that followed, Hall did continue his involvement in racing, most notably winning the Indianapolis 500 in 1980 with the Chaparral 2K, proving that his innovative mind had not been dulled by the 2J disappointment. But the 1970 season with the fan car remained the peak of his ambition for revolutionary aerodynamic concepts. Hall's confidence in the 2J's unrealized potential never wavered. Had the car been allowed to race in 1971 and beyond, had the team solved the reliability issues with the Snowmobile engine, had there been time to refine the skirt system and perfect the suction seal, Hall believed the 2J would have been not just competitive, but dominant. The main thing was to make it reliable, he would say in interviews decades later. What the 2J never got to prove was how far that technology could have been taken. Could the car have won races? Absolutely. The qualifying performances suggested it was easily the fastest car on the grid when everything was working correctly. Could it have dominated a full season? Possibly. Could it have redefined the entire sport years before ground effect actually arrived in Formula One? Perhaps. We will never know, because the racing establishment decided that innovation had gone too far that the 2J represented a threat to the competitive balance, that some ideas were simply ahead of their time and needed to be stopped before they became unstoppable. The 1970 Chaparral 2J occupied a unique place in racing history. It was, by any objective measure, the most advanced and innovative race car of its era. It proved concepts that wouldn't be fully developed and accepted until 8 years later. It demonstrated that aerodynamic downforce could be generated through means entirely different from traditional wings and spoilers. It showed that a young engineer with a fortune, a curious mind, and access to private testing facilities could outpace the entire racing establishment. And then it was banned. The irony is almost too perfect. Jim Hall had created something so revolutionary, so thoroughly superior to everything else on the track, that the only way to stop him was to change the rules of the game while the race was underway. It was the ultimate compliment, delivered in the form of defeat. But racing is not science, and race cars are not built in laboratories. They exist in the messy, political, contested space of human competition where money, ego, and vested interests collide with innovation and ambition. Hall understood this. He had lived through it with the adjustable wing cars. He knew it would happen with the 2J decades later as Colin Chapman and Gordon Murray and the modern F1 technical directors discovered or rediscovered the principles of ground effect, as they implemented suction skirts and shaped underfloors, as they generated downforce through the acceleration of air beneath the car rather than above it. They were all, whether they realized it or not, standing on the shoulders of Jim Hall and the Chaparral 2J. The 1970 Can-Am season lasted only 4 months for the 2J. The car competed in 5 races, finished 1, and collected a total of 6 championship points before being banned into oblivion. But in that brief moment, Jim Hall and his team proved something that would reshape racing for the next 50 years, that the future of aerodynamics lay not in the visible wings and spoilers that everyone could see, but in the invisible forces working beneath the car, in the pressure differential created by velocity and geometry, in the fundamental physics of vacuum and lift. The Chaparral 2J was too far ahead of its time. It was banned before it could prove its full potential. But it was also exactly what racing needed, a leap forward that showed everyone where the sport was heading, even if the racing establishment wasn't ready to acknowledge it. Jim Hall remained in Midland, Texas, with his cars, never selling them, maintaining them, keeping them ready to run. He lived to see ground effect revolutionize Formula One. He lived to see his principles validated, his engineering proven correct, his innovation adopted by the very teams and sanctioning bodies that had once opposed him. The 2J may have been banned after a single season, but its influence has echoed through every lap of racing for the last 50 years. That is the true midnight magic of the Chaparral 2J. Not what it accomplished in 1970, but what it made possible for every racing car that came after. It was the fan car before F1, the herald of the aerodynamic future, the prophet that the racing world was not yet ready to hear.